Alright, so picture this for a moment, right? We got two different kinds of people in a similar situation where they are working on something, whether it's a project, a task for school or work, doesn't really matter. As long as it's something to keep them occupied, they are working on something for sure. But yeah, we got person A over here who just is a random everyday Joe Schmoach, completely normal guy, just doing everything they need to do to get on with their day. But yeah, they work really hard on their project. Next thing you know, they get the kinds of results they always wanted. So good reception from people, lots of praise, and a good report. And typically when you get that kind of positive feedback, you tend to really feel good about yourself, which is completely normal. And whenever people feel really good about themselves, they celebrate, in other words, which is a completely normal thing to do, which I might add. But we got person B over here, pretty much another normal Joe Schmo, average guy, but there's a one tiny little difference with this person, and it's a little something called Impostor Syndrome. But yeah, main difference here is that person B has Impostor Syndrome, and when someone with Impostor Syndrome, they work really hard on their project and get a lot of praise, instead of feeling good about themselves, they tend to react a little differently, where they'll go something along the lines of, "Oh my god, I barely scraped by, I got so lucky." Yeah, that kind of reaction. And typically when someone with imposter syndrome get that kind of response, instead of like feeling good about themselves, they try to put more effort than what they already put into on the work. And typically they just try to outdo themselves, and they already did. Like, they could have done a really phenomenal job, and they're just trying to like one up that in a way. And I feel like this is a little phenomenon everyone universally has dealt with at least once, or is currently going through. I feel like this is something most people, especially like, let's say if you're done with high school going into college, it's definitely something we can all agree we do have. But then again, it doesn't really have to be just going into college. You could have gotten imposter syndrome like any time in your life, really. And I feel like this is something I've generally had to deal with. Not entirely my entire life, but more so a good chunk of my life. But imposter syndrome is something I can describe as, feeling like a fraud despite achieving success, or attributing achievements to just sheer luck. Just something to really doubt yourself in a way. And I feel like this is something I definitely did deal with in my entire life. Well, I'm just gonna say this. I wasn't really the brightest child growing up, but there was a point where I would always come home with good grades, relatively good grades. But instead of, receiving any sort of praise from my parents, they always try to tell me, "Hey, these are good, but you could always try to do better." And yeah, I'll admit, I did feel good about myself when I would always bring home good grades. It's something like I did feel good about myself for a bit, but after I sort of received the same kind of response from my parents, I don't know, I always felt like I became like a perfectionist in a way, or just a high achiever, overachiever, whichever word you want to use. I definitely did struggle to sort of take a compliment of that sort of like material, And for a while, it got really exhausting to just try to better myself when I was already doing a pretty good job. And then generally when I got more and more exhausted, I don't know, I felt a lot more anxious to just see myself as a complete fraud, which, by the way, I'm not really much of a fraud if I was already being successful to achieve these kinds of things. But generally, that's a reaction I had to deal with. Well, not exactly deal with, but that's a reaction I gave whenever I would still get like good reception from anything. And this is something that really hasn't changed with me as I got older and older. Typically, when I start talking to my friends about what I've really been up to as far as trying to like achieve any level of success, I typically tend to doubt myself and my abilities. But yeah, that's sort of the mindset that I went to whenever I would start talking with my friends. And I'll admit, it's really not a good mindset, but I always appreciate talking to my friends whenever they'll start reassuring my achievements, my success. And then typically after that, I just feel good about myself. You know, something I should have done from the start. But the main point that I'm trying to just address here is, as someone who's generally had to deal with imposter syndrome for a majority of my life, it's very exhausting, to say the least. Like, just picture yourself in a scenario where, let's say if you're like the most competent worker at a job, but everyone else is pretty much bailing on you, and you tend to like doubt yourself in your abilities, even though you pretty much know how to do everything. You pretty much do everything, like you run the place, but then you start to compare yourself with others. So you can already see the amount of pressure you're putting yourself in this kind of scenario. And with that kind of pressure in your mind, instead of celebrating the short-term success you just achieved, you just try to say, hey, there's a lot more room to improve for myself, even though you're already doing a good job. But yeah, I think the best way that really just helped me through this sort of phenomenon is just talk it out really with people. So it could be your friends sometimes. I honestly prefer to talk to my friends, you know, people that really understand me well. In my sort of scenario here, I couldn't really talk to my parents because I feel like every time I would talk to something about them, instead of getting any kind of advice, I'd feel like I get judged in a way. And that sort of added to the pressure that I was already just facing in my shoulders. It was definitely a lot of weight to carry. But if you're a person out there with this kind of phenomenon, I just want to say, I'm very proud of you, man. Or woman, doesn't matter. I'm really, really proud of you for making it this far in life. You keep going. You just gotta keep your head straight. Keep working hard. You're doing a great job. And I'm so proud of you for making it this far. But before I end the video here, I just want to say I'm really, really sorry for the lack of uploads. You know, since the first video I posted on the channel, which, by the way, I appreciate everyone for the success that it garnered. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the success on the video, for the warm reception from people. It really motivates me to just try to keep going, you know? But with today's topic on the video, I also did have some sort of imposter syndrome in me, where I was just wondering, like, wow, how did my first video do this well? I got pretty lucky. But yeah, no, I appreciate the love and support that the video received. But as I was saying, as soon as I uploaded that first video, I had a lot going on in my life, you know, just dealing with my car breaking down. Well, not exactly breaking down, but more so just changing the spark plugs. And when I ordered the parts for those, it definitely did take a while for them to arrive. But yeah, I just had a lot going on in my life, and I know I posted like 2 of the community posts on the channel where I said I'm gonna come back pretty soon. I'll see you guys soon, but yeah, that never really ended up happening. So I do apologize for the recent lack of uploads. I'm gonna try to get in the habit of uploading more depending on how my life goes. I'll for sure get in the habit of trying to make more videos. I already had another video idea in mind. And yeah, with that being said, it's the one, the only Rave himself, signing off. I hope you guys have a good Christmas and a Happy New Year's from yours truly. Peace out, y'all.